Huh. As I'm forced to myself, I need to shave. Hmm. Okay, this is part question mark still of this series of answering questions from this friendly atheist guy. I think he changed his name since then. And I think I've already said that too. So today, there are basically three questions that I'm going to answer. The first is, do I think Jesus is coming back in my lifetime? Second, and pretty much a follow up to the first, if I do, what do I say to all those people, like for 2,000 years, who thought the same thing? And then the second question is, why is Jesus' life, death, and resurrection so similar to that of other myths? And question three is, how do we know when to interpret the Bible, some parts of the Bible literally, and some parts of the Bible metaphorically or allegorically? So, yeah, those are the questions. I also am thinking about starting sort of an audiobook series. I think that would be cool. I'd start with the Gulag Archipelago because that's a fun book. I don't know. If I do, I'd probably upload maybe an hour's worth per week, or maybe a chapter's worth, which is more like 5 hours worth. So, yeah, that's something I'm thinking about. So, to the questions. First one, do I think Jesus is coming back in my lifetime? I don't know. He might not. I don't think that's really important. Um, yeah, but it's possible. I know a lot of people. I mean, like almost every generation, they say this uh, that Jesus is coming back in my lifetime or in our lifetime. So you got to get ready. You got to make yourself right, and that's a pretty good principle to live by. And then really, you don't need Jesus to come back in order to live well, according to the Bible. You could die at any moment, really. Like I don't know, some freak subspace rupture could just happen right here, and then my head would explode or something, just randomly, and there's a non-zero possibility of that happening. So yeah, I have to be ready. I have to be right with God at all times in case any sort of freak acts of entropy just suddenly kill me. And then I think this guy, he asks one question is, if will God smite me down with a lightning bolt right now? And then he's like, wait for it. Um, that's possible too, I suppose. I don't know if it's possible on a sunny day like this. I'd probably have to go into a bit more of my meteorological research in order to figure that out. But anyway, the principle is be ready, be right with God, no matter what. Um, you could say that if you die and your mind just goes blank, because it is sort of a physical resurrection that the Bible teaches, that once you die and your mind goes blank, it's almost going to be like the next moment that you wake up and are resurrected and are ushered up into heaven to be judged right at the feet of God. So, in a way, you could sort of say like Jesus is coming soon, no matter what time you live in. Um, but at the same time, it's sort of like it's not really enough to say within my generation. You could say that you could believe that there should be evidence for that, but there are certain particular things that have to happen before it comes back, and once the clock starts, then we can probably start saying, oh, okay, well, that seems pretty revelatory or something. Um, but at this moment, I don't think. Yeah, there's been a few things, I suppose. Uh, but yeah, there are certain key things that need to happen first. Like the temple needs to be built. They have to restart the sacrifices again. Then they have to stop the sacrifices, and Israel has to make a treaty with a bunch of foreign nations all at once for 7 years, um, mediated by one world ruler. and yeah, a lot of stuff like that. That just they're more the prerequisites to this. None of that's really happened, so I don't know. I don't know if the clock's ticking. What do I say to all those people who thought the same thing? That Jesus might becomes in my lifetime. I'm gonna say, ha, and be like, well, we're all in the same boat. I'm just gonna be in the grave talking to old Saint Paul and saying, you know, in my bones, my jaw is just gonna moving, and he'll know what I'm saying. He'll be able to read my teeth. Anyway, why is Jesus' life, birth, and resurrection, or life, death, and resurrection so similar to other myths? The answer is it's not. I'll use one example, and then this is really this should be a fallacy if it's not a logical fallacy, but I think it is a fallacy of similarity or something. But basically, one example, the myth of Osiris. So what happens to Osiris is he's a king, a ruler, pharaoh of Egypt, and then I think he rules Upper Egypt, and his brother Seth rules Lower Egypt, and Seth gets jealous and kills him because he wants to unite all of Egypt. Seth does, but he's also evil, so there's that issue. He kills him and cuts him up into 12 pieces, scatters him around the territory of Egypt, and each of those bits of him become a city later. This is the myth. But his phallus, of course, he throws into the river, and it gets eaten by piranhas. So then later, Isis, his wife, Osiris's wife, gets upset about this, you know, that understandably, and decides to take Seth down. And how does she do this? Well, she goes and digs up all the pieces of Osiris, puts them back together, does some sort of incantation. Then she creates the obelisk so that she can get pregnant with the weird child of Osiris, which is sort of like a magical fertility thing that somehow she's able to get pregnant from a big rock that is made to look like Osiris's thing. So, the ding dong. Either way, she has Horus. This is the child of her and Osiris, and together, Horus and Osiris, from what I understand, from what I remember, they take out Seth. They kill him or something along those lines. And then it's really interesting because Egyptian mythology is certainly not uniform. So some myths have Seth as the guide to the guide of Ra on the lake of the universe, or the river of the universe. So Ra, of course, is the sun. So Seth is the one paddling the boat so that the sun can go across. And then, of course, you have Apep, who is chasing it, trying to fight it. And then sometimes Seth fights Apep, so sometimes he fights the god of destruction, which is Apep. And then sometimes Seth is on the side of Apep, and they both work together to defeat Ra. And then Ra, I forgot who's steering the boat at that point. So, either way, that's a side note. The things that are similar are basically Osiris dies and he comes back. And I suppose you could see people from tyranny, but it's like all. And then this is listed as one of the stories that, and I've seen the list, this is listed as one of the stories that Jesus' life, death, and resurrection are similar to, or based off of. Okay, now, sure, you could list all things that are similar. I can do the same thing with modern attempts at abiogenesis and the history of the world and the ancient pagan Greek myths found in Homer's Iliad. I think it's Homer's Iliad. The ancient Greek myths say, well, they believed in a primordial soup that birthed the things that produced the gods that produced humans. And of course, you could say that the nowadays is found in science. Therefore, there's no difference between science, the theory of evolution, and the theory and the ancient Greek myths. Therefore, it seems to be invalidated. No, that's not how it works. I'm sorry, my fellow atheists. Basically, there are far more dissimilarities than there are similarities, and if the people who put these lists together would be honest enough to list these, which I don't think that'd be very probable or practical because they're too innumerable. But you could think, for instance, Osiris was a monarch, a king. Jesus was, of course, not one of those. He was more like a religious teacher. Osiris was, let's see, what else happened? Okay, Osiris sort of stayed in the underworld after they defeated Seth. Jesus, of course, came back and he went up. Osiris was he the? Yeah, well, he was the son of Newt. So you could say that they were sort of like both the son of God, but of course, Osiris sort of had two god parents. But Osiris also had a son, Horus, and a wife. Jesus, of course, did not have either of those. Osiris then his son Horus began then to rule the entire known world at the time. This, of course, does not happen with Jesus. Osiris does not perform many miracles, as far as I'm aware. Osiris also does not teach that the basic principles of Christianity, that you have to essentially be pacifistic in the face of tyranny, which, that's the traditional idea of Christianity, but I don't think that's really true. I think that might be a misrepresentation. But either way, there's a certain level of grace and mercy that Jesus teaches that is not found in the ancient Egyptian myths. At the same time, of course, Osiris kills Seth, and Jesus has no one to kill. You could say he conquers death, but Seth isn't the god of death. Okay, Osiris is actually the god of the god of the underworld, and of course Jesus is not. So you could go on and on about these sort of dissimilarities, but it's really just disingenuous because that doesn't even matter. That doesn't even come close to demonstrating that, first of all, that there's a similarity. Second of all, even if there was, that would not prove at all the invalidity of the Christian story. That's not how it works. I'm sorry. So, yeah, and that's just one example. You could sort of create some sort of amalgam of ancient myths and create more of the story of Jesus. But then you have another serious problem is, first of all, were these people all insanely familiar with all of these stories? And in order to really understand this, second of all, why were all of these things predicted in the Jewish faith far before Jesus ever existed? Like, most of these things were predicted in the Jewish faith. And Jews would argue about a couple things, but most of the things were. And then also, this does not. This would be basically a chicken and egg problem. Like, God sort of gives in this narrative of the Bible, he sort of close to the beginning gives people hints at how events are going to be played out. Like, if any of you have looked at the genealogy list of the names from Adam to Noah, you get basically the story of the gospel. And that's exactly the story of the gospel. Then you have, of course, the woman's seed defeating the serpent and all these other things. And so in the narrative of the Bible, you get these certain principles laid out far before the events happened of Jesus. And if this is true, and they're also human universals because they would have existed before humanity really split into a bunch of these different factions, according to the narrative of the Bible. So, if you think that the Bible is correct, is true, if that's what you sort of assume, then it makes sense why other cultures would actually have certain aspects of the story. if you think that the Bible is not true, at least in its basic narrative, then you can assume that Christianity borrowed from all of these, but you'd also have to assume that they borrowed from them far before they even existed. Anyway, and then this just goes back to, do you believe God exists? If you do, then you believe that he is sort of the one who put this idea into humanity before all the splits, and then humanity sort of corrupted this primal story and produced their own corrupted versions. And then if you believe God doesn't exist, then of course all of these people took all of the good things about or supposedly good things about all these other myths, and put them together, and then added like 90% their own stuff and their own theology, and then created this Jesus of Nazareth, which, is historically problematic. Either way, it boils down to, first of all, a chicken and egg problem. Second of all, what are your presuppositions, etc. So really, this question is in no way any sort of defeater of Christianity. It more just demonstrates that if you are biased against Christianity, then you'll probably believe this sort of evidence. If you are not biased against Christianity, or you're biased for Christianity, then this evidence is just stupid. Or argument is just stupid. I don't even know if it would be called evidence. I mean, you could possibly make it into evidence. Okay, and then lastly, oh wow, 16 minutes. Lastly is the biblical hermeneutics. I might want to make a separate video for this one because this is sort of important. I think I will do that. See ya.